It was supposed to be a harmless moment brought on by a child's curiosity. However, the whole atmosphere changed when 5-year-old Prince Louis asked his grandfather, King Charles, a question in a quiet moment in the garden. Charles went pale, according to witnesses. Within hours, aides were frantically trying to contain what insiders are now referring to as the most dangerous question ever posed by a royal youngster after Camilla froze. What was it that Louis said that rocked the monarchy to its foundation? Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. They were strolling close to Balmoral's rose garden, far from the camera's glare. A silent conversation between a grandfather and his grandchild. Then Louis looked up and said, "Grandpa, why do people claim I'm not truly a prince?" And the delicate serenity was broken. The words were like thunder to King Charles. He reportedly halted in the middle of his step, staring at Louis, unable to come up with an answer. Nearby, a palace footman observed the monarch's face losing its color. According to reports, Camilla, who had been following the two, stopped, turned suddenly, and moved away while covering her eyes. Nobody anticipated a child asking such a question, and nobody was ready for the avalanche it would cause. Whispers have been circulating around the monarchy's hallways for years. Unspoken suspicions about bloodlines, sealed papers, and altered documents were whispered, but no one had ever dared to express them so openly and innocently. Louis had posed a question rather than an accusation, and in some way that increased the danger. It was said that Charles's answer was not audible, a faltering mutter of, "Nonsense, my beloved boy." However, the harm had already been done. Nearby aides noticed the king's fingers shaking. Silently, security was told to divert all media attention from the Western Garden. A thorough internal briefing had also been sought by the evening. Not about the media, but about Louis's question's beginnings. Already, senior aides were making assumptions. Had Louis heard something at school? Had there been a slip-up in the household? Or worse, had someone purposefully told him? It was unimaginable that the public would unwittingly tug at the most delicate thread of the monarchy, because the youngest Cambridge child was so adored for his mischievous innocence. According to accounts, Camilla did not come back for supper that night. Charles ate in his private room by himself. The atmosphere of the estate changed. A child's query had caused a surge of anxiety, sorrow, and distrust. However, the question itself wasn't unfounded, which was what made it so horrifying. It stemmed from something even more unsettling. Whispers that before Louis's birth, cover-up whispers, of the DNA testing that had been asked for but never discussed, was a persistent notion among some courtiers that not all heirs were descended from the proper line. It all came tumbling back to the surface when Louis asked. Royal advisors made a valiant effort to protect him from the consequences of his question, but the repercussions were already being felt by staff, family, and secrets. It has been buried for a long time. Deep within the castle, however, an ancient secret started to rumble, as astonished attendants attempted to protect the young prince from what he had unwittingly awakened, come back to life. Princess Diana sent a letter to her sons years before she passed away, but it was never intended for public reading. In it, she alluded to a problem with the way the royal bloodlines were being managed. The palace brushed it off as paranoia for years, but those words returned with eerie clarity when Louis asked. In a cream-colored envelope, sealed deep within the royal archives, it had Diana's handwriting and a single phrase, "For William and Harry, when the time is right." But until today, the moment never arrived. When Prince Louis posed his naive, unsettling query, top employees frantically tried to think of anything that could be related to what he had said. At that moment, someone recalled the letter, and the room fell silent as they read it. Diana's remarks were frank, intimate, and terrifying. "A little one will eventually ask a big question," she cautioned, And that question would turn out to be more complicated than the family had anticipated. Like lightning, the line struck. How was she supposed to know? Was it a prophecy? Or had she discovered something that had been hidden for years? It was common knowledge that Diana harbored suspicions behind closed doors. Suspicions that the House of Windsor's ancestry was not as stable or truthful as it seemed. Although she never spoke about them in public, her closest friends and family said she once alluded to bloody secrets. At the time, her remarks were dismissed as the emotional aftermath from a failing marriage. But now they seem like warnings no one wanted to hear. According to reports, Charles, who was still only the Prince of Wales at the time, Dwydmawn Torabwy Alacan, fought valiantly to prevent the contents of the letter from ever being made public. He claimed it would confuse the boys and lead to pointless conjecture. However, even his most ardent supporters now concede that maybe he was more afraid of validation than confusion. The passage mentioning two names, Louis and Charlotte, long before they were born, startled officials the most. Protect the future children if something were to happen to me. One day, individuals who claimed to support it could doubt their veracity. That eerie allusion compelled royal archivists to acknowledge that Diana's insight had been unsettlingly accurate in addition to being emotive. Conversations that had long been off limits began to resurface as panic gradually swept through Buckingham Palace's upper halls. Had Diana noticed something about Charles's inner circle? Had she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear? Had Diana noticed something about Charles's inner circle? Had she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear? And why, following her passing, has no one followed up on this thread? Now it felt like a ticking time bomb to ignore her warning. Senior officials started posing private queries. Could her grandchild now be more deeply affected by the things that were said in that letter, which was written to protect her sons? Simple questions can go beyond a child's inquisitiveness. But the exact trigger that Diana was afraid of? However, if Diana had left a breadcrumb trail, what transpired inside Windsor's vaults was what really broke the illusions. In Windsor, a file sealed under Crown Emergency Protocol is concealed beneath 6 inches of reinforced steel. What's inside? Private royal physicians' annotations, cross-checked reports, and DNA samples. Few people were aware of it for years. However, a senior assistant was instructed to get the Louis file following Louis's inquiry, and everything was altered by what he discovered. It was not listed on the standard registry. No known royal record contained it. Level Gray was the classification given to this file, a category set aside for content deemed too erratic to be recorded in conventional royal archives. It could only be retrieved with a direct order from the king or, in this instance, an urgent directive from the king's confidential secretary. Fear, not pressure from the media, was the source of the urgency. The palace had to confirm the one thing they had concealed for decades, the bloodline itself, inside the hefty folder if Diana had warned of a question and Louis had finally asked it. These included updated test summaries from only a few years earlier, as well as lab reports dating back to the late 1990 seconds. The initials WHGCL were used to label the samples, and abnormalities that sent shockwaves across the royal walls were hidden deep within those classified files. Non-alignment discovered and mitochondrial inconsistency unresolved were annotations found in several entries. Subject lineage displays divergence from predicted paternal signature was one of the highlighted comments, but even more concerning. To put it another way, it seemed that a member of the royal family might not be biologically related to the line they were supposed to be from. The implications were clear, even if the authors avoided using direct language. There was no obvious finger pointed in the notes. However, the shadows they formed were long enough to cover every name on the page, for each, particularly the youngest. Early files often contained the name of a former royal physician, which was eventually completely redacted. One source claims that in the early 2000s, this person made an effort to leave in secret, claiming that their moral beliefs conflicted with the procedures of the organization. The attempt was thwarted. According to reports, the same person, who is no longer listed in any official records, approved 3 of the 5 tests, but left mysterious notes on the last page of the Louis file. When it was discovered that Lord Mountbatten's successor had personally ordered the dossier into safekeeping, the story became even more complex. The same individual who has been tasked with ensuring that a legacy is carried forward through the generations. What many suspected was confirmed by his involvement. This wasn't only an error, it was a cover-up at the legacy level, possibly lasting decades, and motivated more by the preservation of public faith than by personal truth. A frightening hush was heard when the file was ultimately given to King Charles, according to aides. He threw everyone out of the room. For the remainder of the day, no meetings were planned, and for more than 7 hours, he was by himself in his study, surrounded only by the file, the truth it held, and the weight of its implications. The true destruction, however, lay not just in the documents, but also in who else saw them and what they chose to do. Camilla was the second person to examine the information, according to palace insiders. In a matter of minutes, she was seen crying and pleading with Charles to end this madness before it consumes us all. Even the seasoned royal servants were reportedly taken aback by Camilla's ultimatum the same evening. "I'll take everything with me when I walk, if you let this out." What started off as silent worry swiftly descended into emotional breakdown. Charles had been supported by Camilla over decades of controversy, criticism, and uncertainty. However, this was not the same. There was nothing political in the Windsor file. They had no repute. They were inherited. Beneath the ramifications, there was a threat considerably more serious than the criticism from the media, a direct hit to her children's future security. According to those close to the Queen Consort, she was distraught. Her response was desperate rather than dramatic. She understood what it might indicate as soon as she saw the highlighted differences in ancestry. What prevented them from contacting Louis if inquiries about him were let to fester in public? Even more, what prevented them from eventually going after her own family, Tom and Laura, whose access, status, and advantages had been steadily increasing during Charles's rule? Charles and Camilla reportedly got into a heated argument behind sealed doors at Clarence House. "I didn't ask for this," Charles mumbled, and witnesses heard bits of his voice shatter, followed by Camilla's scream, then put an end to it. The weight of years of buried shame, personal aspirations, and suppressed facts combined in the instant before it destroyed us all. Senior Privy Council members were already being contacted by the Queen Consort's legal staff early the following morning. Transparency for the public was not their aim. Containment was the strategy. A leaked memo claims that Camilla was ready to use emergency protection provisions in her marriage contract, which would have allowed her to keep some rights, property, and even titles in the event that she and Charles formally separated in the middle of a crisis. Unspoken, but known, was the threat. Charles would lose Camilla if he decided to tell the truth, and maybe start a public and legal battle that might split the monarchy. However, what emerged in the wake of the ultimatum was what made it even more terrifying. According to several staff members, Camilla has previously tampered with DNA-related results. In 2018, a covert investigation into ancestry rumors had been launched, but it was quickly closed. According to recent rumors, Camilla was involved in its burial and used her power to neutralize the threat before it gained traction. That choice was now coming back to haunt her. Nevertheless, a file or a whisper might not be the most damaging aspect of this story. Maybe it's a recording. According to sources, the entire fight may have been recorded by an aide's body-worn recording device used for official documentation at the height of the dispute. If verified and made public, it has the potential to destroy the royal image in a manner never seen before. And when the monarchy's fissures deepened, a historical figure reappeared to make sure the truth would no longer remain a secret. Prince Harry heard the earthquakes in the castle across the Atlantic and used an encrypted channel to send a shocking message. I departed for this reason, as you are aware. Perhaps it's time for us all to answer the question if Louis did. Silence was no longer an option once the message reached Charles in the dark of night. Although the message was brief, its impact was incalculable. It was more than just a son talking to his dad. A truth bomb that the monarchy had long attempted to stifle was detonated by a royal exile. The emotional wound reopened as soon as the encrypted text appeared on Charles's safe tablet. Never before had Harry been so forthright. The royal family was forced to face what they had buried when his comments reverberated through sealed hallways and secured networks. Harry's word choice was deliberate. Genetic distortion of royal succession. In the forefront was a statement that no one in the monarchy ever dared to utter. He had skirted the truth for years. He was tossing it into the fire now. And he wasn't just talking to Charles. They were all involved. Meghan begged Harry to stay out of it, according to royal sources. Any speech, even one made in private, may rekindle tensions that had hardly subsided, she said. Harry, however, was determined. It's no longer about me, according to reports, he told her. Louis is the subject of this. And what none of us had the courage to ask. The consequences were felt right away. William exploded when he heard his brother's message. He claimed to be blindsided, angry, and described it as highly disruptive and foolish. He believed that Harry had only brought the monarchy closer to disintegration. William was more enraged by Harry's speech before the family had decided on an internal response than by the message itself. However, there was more going on beneath William's rage, fear, because this was a deliberate attack from someone who already knew the contours of the truth, not a petty assault from a resentful brother. Later, it was discovered through leaked conversations that Harry had known about the Windsor DNA file for years. He had collected his own data in secret, had private consultations with outside experts, and perhaps have even carried out his own DNA tests. One insider claims that it was years ago, but up until now he had remained silent. He had been purposefully silent. But the dam had been shattered by Lewis's inquiry. What controversy, interviews, and memoirs were unable to accomplish was that one child's naive clarity. It had brought timing and truth together. Harry was not going to let it pass, since he regarded it as a time of reckoning. The hush that followed the message was telling to King Charles, "Don't deny, no rebuttal. Just spending a lot of time by myself at the royal home." He was aware that the walls were getting closer, and the sound of disintegration got louder with each silent moment. William's response within the royal gates would ignite the future, even though Harry started the public frenzy. He was the heir, the king to come. Nothing, however, could have prepared William for the surge of uncertainty that swept through him when he faced his father. Catherine discovered him by himself that evening, crying. "What if I wasn't supposed to have any of this?" he muttered. And even she was unable to respond for the first time. William had dedicated his entire life to being king. Under the oppressive weight of expectation, every action, every word, every moment was meticulously calibrated. However, he was unable to ignore the booming stillness that had engulfed the castle following Lewis's query and Harry's shocking message. He sensed something was off in his bones. The man who had once held him in his arms but was now unable to even look him in the eyes was the only one who could answer his questions. William went into Charles's private study late one evening. Just a boy asking his father for the truth. No cameras, no help. "Were you aware?" he inquired. "Have you read the file?" At first, Charles did not answer. He just averted his gaze, as though the passing of time might cause the moment to go. Then the words that broke William's will came. "You'd rather not find out." That was an evasive, hollow sentence, devastating hit like a hammer. There was stillness in the room, but it was a screaming silence. Father and son's relationship had been slowly deteriorating for years until that point. Over trust, not duty or heritage. Something inside William had altered by the time he exited the room. His skepticism was not limited to the monarchy. Everything that had previously been promised to him was causing him to mistrust. Catherine discovered him by himself in their private sitting room later that evening. He had crimson eyes. His hands shook. And he uttered the words that rocked her to her core for the first time in their marriage. What if I wasn't supposed to have any of this? Constantly calm and steady, Catherine felt her own heart give out under the strain of his suffering. She reached for him, but her touch was insufficient to mend the damage that had been done to him. She made an effort to reorient him. She reminded him of their responsibilities, their kids, and the stability they continued to offer to a society in disarray. However, William was not considering cameras or thrones. His kid, Louis, was on his mind. A youngster whose straightforward inquiry had revealed centuries' worth of well-kept facts. In order to prevent Louis from becoming just another piece in the terrible cycle of secrets, Catherine pleaded with him to do so. William sat by himself at his desk and started writing that night after Catherine had gone to sleep. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a speech. The letter was addressed to Louis, Charlotte, and George. A hypothetical letter. One article began, "Here's what I need you to know in case everything you've been told ever fails. It has not been seen by anyone, not even Catherine. However, the mere fact that it exists shows how deeply uncertain he is." Once believed to be unbreakable, the father-son tie was beginning to erode. And now the future king was merely a man, caught between silence and the truth, drowning in questions for which there were no answers. Love and legacy. However, a covert council was already in place to decide if the throne could withstand the consequences despite the emotional rubble. There were 3 black automobiles, no cameras, no public declarations, just murmurs. Under complete secrecy, senior royals, constitutional advisors, and intelligence officers convened at Sandringham to discuss a single issue. Could the throne possibly survive if the DNA allegations were ever confirmed? There was no official schedule for the conference. They were called, not invited. Those there realized at once that what was happening could not be recorded. It was impossible to record, and it was definitely impossible to leak. However, history has shown that when the monarchy is in a panic, the walls rarely remain silent. There was a tense atmosphere at Sandringham. Every face at the table was filled with terror of betrayal, collapse, and a future that suddenly rested on a single genetic thread. It was Princess Anne who spoke first. Although she spoke in a calm tone, her words pierced the room like a knife. The public will be aware if this is accurate. The truth will come to light whether we like it or not. Cold looks greeted her. No response, though. They all knew in their hearts that she was correct. The Archbishop of Canterbury had likewise been brought in to offer moral rather than policy advice. His presence made it clear how serious the situation was. The moral authority that the monarchy professed to symbolize was undermined if the royal bloodline was. He cautioned that lying in the face of divine accountability was a threat to the nation's soul as well as the institution. The Lord Chamberlain, who didn't hold back, then arrived. He threatened that if something wasn't done right now, the institution would completely collapse. Revelations of managed succession would undermine public faith, which has already been damaged by scandals in recent years. He said that the story would either define the monarchy now or destroy it in the future. One of the constitutional attorneys in attendance made the terrifying suggestion that many had anticipated. Quietly remove Prince Louis from the succession. Nothing to say. Just a procedural update disguised as an internal change. The ensuing hush was oppressive. Nobody wanted to be the first to say yes, but nobody also said no right away. A vote was called as the number of possibilities decreased and anxiety increased. It was desperate, not democratic. Every participant expressed their opinions in writing, kept under the supervision of an intelligence officer in a sealed box. Everyone was shocked by the outcome when the votes were counted. It was divided equally, half for entering the storm, half for protecting Louis from it. But the outcome was thrown into disarray by one unexplained abstention. Nobody would acknowledge who had not cast a ballot. However, the problem remained unresolved due to the abstention. No strategy, no guidance. Just increasing dread and broken determination. Silently, the council departed Sandringham, each member taking with them a future they no longer understood and a secret none of them desired. And Prince Louis, oblivious to the fire he had ignited, spoke once again as the establishment fumbled, to the only one with the courage to respond this time. Catherine realized the world had changed forever as she knelt next to her son. She grasped his hand, met his gaze, and uttered the words that all royals had long been too scared to speak out loud. "It is your heart, not your blood, that makes you a royal." However, a mother's fight had just started beneath her words. Catherine chose to remain silent as a tactic rather than a sign of surrender, while the palace frantically tried to regain control. She was the first to express a different kind of truth in a family that was collapsing due to secrets. In whispers, not in words or advice, but to a youngster whose inquiry had rocked a kingdom. She stayed calm in front of the world. However, Catherine was discreetly changing the rules behind the scenes. According to others close to the family, Catherine started recording every discussion, choice, and development in the tale that had captivated her son. She no longer trusted the palace to keep him safe. She was no longer merely a prospective monarch. She was a mother getting her child ready for a reality that may either liberate him or destroy him. Her writing was not intended for general consumption. Louis was the intended recipient. One day he would be old enough to comprehend. Additionally, rumors that she might make a drastic move increased as her power within Kensington's gates increased. Unverified rumors circulated. However, she insisted that Catherine had discussed in private with top aides the possibility of temporarily resigning from her formal royal responsibilities in order to shield her kids from the chaos that was going on around them. This silent rebellion rocked the institution for a woman who was recognized for her devotion to the Queen. But nobody dared to challenge her. She was elegant, but silently furious, according to aides. The same woman who had maintained her composure in the face of palace politics and smiled through controversy was now in possession of something far more potent than public favor, moral clarity. And Catherine's lucidity was captivating in a kingdom that was in a state of bewilderment. The public's support for her personally, as well as the family, started to grow. She was dubbed the true north of the monarchy by commentators. Her maternal instinct resonated with her parents. Her composure in the midst of pandemonium was appreciated by the public. People who had previously doubted her royal significance started to support her quiet fortitude. Catherine emerged as the lighthouse in the mist of doubt. Louis, a young child at the center of it all, became the compass that everyone needed but no one anticipated because of his unadulterated and untamed belief in truth. Neither succession laws nor genetics made sense to him. He knew what honesty was. And for some reason, that innocence was more important than any royal proclamation. There was nothing political about Catherine's pledge to her son. It had nothing to do with thrones or titles. It has to do with honor. About bringing up a child who one day will be able to walk through a storm with his head held high, not because of the crown on it, but because of the truth in his heart. One last shock, however, lies beneath the dust, hidden somewhere no one had previously considered looking. A handwritten message from Queen Elizabeth has turned up in a sealed drawer in Balmoral Castle, marked, to be opened in case of a succession crisis. Should doubt ever shadow the bloodline, trust the heart of the people, and watch for the child who dares to ask, is written within. Not only was Louis's query benign, but it was also foreseen. The remaining loyalists inside the palace were shocked by the codicil's revelation. It had been concealed in a room that only two of the late queen's trusted advisors knew about, and it was never supposed to be opened unless the foundation of succession itself was under danger. That time had finally arrived, and Elizabeth's last words brought her back into a world she had no longer lived to witness, but was nevertheless guiding in some way. The note was written about 20 years ago. It bore the weight of silent insight and was written in the Queen's distinctive hand. She didn't mention names. She didn't blame anyone. She did, however, provide clarity, which was more potent than a royal order. The codicil suggested that she was aware that the legitimacy of the crown's ancestry might be called into doubt at some point. When that time came, she trusted a child's courage, conscience, and compassion, rather than titles or papers. Something changed when the contents were read out loud to the senior palace staff, who were the only ones allowed access. Discreetly invited in to confirm and analyze the message, academics and royal historians were astounded. A monarch had never before left a contingency for a situation so emotionally and morally complex. The family had not been told by Elizabeth to keep the throne intact at any costs. Rather, she had challenged them to reevaluate the true meaning of royalty. Technicalities and tests were no longer an option for the palace. The question at the core of its identity was now being faced. Does one acquire a crown by believing or by birth? Beyond Balmoral, the codicil's emphasis on the child who dares to inquire struck a chord. The public's support, which was gradually moving in Catherine and Louis's direction, suddenly exploded into awe. In private, the media and royal insiders started calling Louis the Prince of Truth. Additionally, the topic had changed even though there was no official change in succession. The monarchy was rebuilding. It was no longer based on quiet, on a boy's questions back, and the eerie wisdom of a queen. According to reports, Charles was rendered mute after hearing what was in his mother's codicil. Those closest to him claimed that he appeared smaller in some way, not in size, but in assurance. He now had to bear the weight of his heritage, legacy, and the truth. And no one else was able to answer the question that the little voice had dared to ask. Thus, the monarchy faced its reckoning, and possibly its only chance for salvation in the soft voice of a child. Thank you for viewing. Remember to subscribe and like, and we'll see you in the next one.